Thank you for inviting me to speak today. Now, I want to talk a bit about the work that the UK 2070 Commission has done to set the context, but I particularly want to focus on the issue of devolution and its crucial importance to the task of rebalancing the UK or levelling up. But let me just move on to the next slide, if I can, and talk a bit about the definition, and it touches on something that Christine talked about. I was at an event recently where they didn't ask what do you think the government's policy is on levelling up, which is quite a tough one, but actually what do you think the policy on levelling up should be? And for me, it's about two key things. It's about people and it's about places, two dimensions. The people point, you might argue, is about creating a more equal society and lifting people out of poverty. And in that sense, it's not an issue of where they live. Their life is no doubt equally as challenged, whether it's in London or in Liverpool. In fact, you can argue that if you're on very low and or uncertain incomes, London is even harder because of the other high cost issues. And it seems to me that much of what we would want to do in creating a more equal society goes to questions of taxation, benefits, and indeed things like the minimum wage. I differentiate that because I think that's for every part of the country from the issue of places, where there is a very specific issue in this country about the scale of the regional imbalances. And that's been the focus of the UK 2070 work. And that is unambiguously about places. And I think we need to always have in mind that there are two agendas going on here that need to be recognized in the discussions that we have. Go on to the next slide. Now, if you pick up nothing else from what I say, I wanted to hammer home these points really as kind of precursors to what I say in a moment. First of all, the inequalities are long-standing in this country. A colleague of mine pointed me to a paragraph in David Kinston's book about 1962 that talks about this issue, and indeed talks about the experiences of the northern child as it's described in this article. So this is a long-standing issue. The second point is that yes, you will find inequalities in every developed country. The point is they're massively bigger in this country, and we need to recognize that the regional disparities are outliers as far as the rest of the developed world is concerned. I'll come back to that. Third point, we're moving in the wrong direction. As we do something about it, the challenge will get bigger. And I think Christine talked about the issue on housing, which I would entirely endorse. And then finally, we will not deliver on levelling up without decentralisation and devolution. But that needs to align with national thinking. It's not one or the other. You need both to work together. Move on to the next slide if I can, Chris. Here's a slide which I'm very grateful actually to Ron Martin, who's just about to produce a book with Ben Gardner, Andy Pike, Peter Sunby and Peter Tyler on this whole issue of levelling up and left behind places. And he's extended the kind of graph, if you like, to the furthest point we can get at the moment, 2017. And this just demonstrates the scale of the difference in growth, the long-standing nature of the problem we're talking about. And as I said earlier, you could have taken the graph back earlier to start the divergence. If we move on to the next slide, this one shows you the scale of the extent to which Britain is an outlier, the UK is. Professor Philip McCann of Sheffield University compared essentially 30 countries, developed countries, on a basket of 28 indicators. So he didn't just look at one indicator, he looked at 28. And guess where the UK came out? 28th out of 30 in its scale of regional inequalities. So people will tell you about France and other places and about the fact they have inequalities. We are much bigger on this. And if we can go on to the next slide, this is the direction of travel. Very grateful to some work by Professor Ying Jing. He did it for UK 2070, where he modeled the effect of different growth scenarios in this country. And on the higher growth scenario, what he found was that over 50% of the jobs would go to London and the wider southeast, which is less than a third of the population. And what that would do, and you might say, well, this is good news for London and the southeast. It's not, because you see escalating housing prices, and longer travel times and major environmental issues as well. So on his modeling, even on a high growth scenario, we face significant challenges and, as Christine alluded to, missed opportunities in this country. So if we can then move on to the next slide, this is really saying, why have we got this problem? And here's the list of things that we picked out in our reports. First of all, we've been bedeviled by short-term policies that have then been undone. I've just listed a few acronyms here: urban development corporations, regional development agencies. They all have a half-life of about 3 or 4 years, maybe. And then somebody starts saying we need a new model. LEPS I could have added on the list, and so on. And that means we just do not have the consistent policy and delivery apparatus that you need to make a difference here. The second point is poorly funded. I'm sure somebody's going to say, oh, what about all the money that went into Europe? Well, from Europe, I should say. Well, again, I'm grateful to Ron for looking at the numbers. And what he finds is that in the period of discretionary spend, UK and Europe, the figure on average was 0.27% of the UK's GNI. It's minuscule. And the key point, the last point I make on this slide, it's been massively outweighed by where mainstream funding has gone. So we've had a regional policy in this country that it's just not moved in the direction that people think it does. And our underlying policies and housing Christine's talked about, and our approach to analysing projects have reinforced the sense of inequality. Add that up and you can see the sense of why we've not delivered. We move on to the next slide, if I can. This slide, if we can bring up the whole slide on this one. We've lost the picture on it, I think, if you can. That's it, great, thank you very much. I put this particular picture up from the Manchester Evening News, which was the front page of the Manchester Evening News when we produced our first report in May 2019. What was the point they were making here? The point they were making was around the comparisons with the UK and Germany, where Germany had made a serious effort to address the divisions in their country, not entirely succeeded, put serious money in seriously aligned policies, which had simply been absent in the UK. And as a result, the country had come from one country and become many, was the point we were making. In fact, some parts of the UK, some regions had lower GDP than East Germany prior to reunification. And that's why the Manchester Evening News said we need to tear down our own wall and start to move towards a single country. Move on to the next slide, if I can. This is a crucial point for me, really. We often hear conversations to say it's about connectivity, it's about skills, it's about housing, it's about the advanced economy, it's about the everyday economy. The truth is, it's not about any one of those. To deliver levelling up, you have to work on a whole range of areas. No one single thing will address the issue of levelling up. And our argument in the report was that whatever you do has to be comprehensive, large scale, and long term. Anything less than that is not going to deliver. We argued that the discretionary funds should be tripled from where they're going. So you should look to put in at least $1/3 of a trillion over the next 20 years. And that should be accompanied by an increase in infrastructure spend to 3% as opposed to the 1% now, and something like 4 billion going into tackling investing in universities and tackling the gap on centres of excellence. So I make this point because I really worry we're not going to learn the lessons of the past, and we're going to do incremental, fragmented projects. And truthfully, doing this comprehensive large-scale approach is the thing that government finds hardest to do. Let's be honest about it. So can I then move on to the next slide and say a few words about devolution here? I want to talk about the why and then the how, really. Why is devolution important? Well, let me just run through some of the key points. The first is the very kind of dispersed nature of our position in this country means that national policies don't work. Because we're an outlier, our very inequalities create a problem with national policies. Again, Christine talked about housing. you haven't got one housing market in the UK, you've got many. So single housing policies don't work. Single policies generally struggle. So devolution allows you to adapt what you do locally to local circumstances. Second point, sorry, we have an overloaded centre. I saw this when I was head of the civil service. The centre is way down with detail. I think it reached its peak for me when we had a conversation at full cabinet about starlings on a particular site and the inability to develop that site. This is the fallacy of power, that you can run everything from the center. You can't, and what you have is an overloaded center and disempowered places. Third point is, if you devolve, you get more equal growth, really. This is what the OECD has said. You don't necessarily get higher growth, you get more equal growth if you devolve. And I think finally, it allows the space for innovation, different models of delivery. And I'm involved in 3 or 4 different ones. Manchester Mayoral Development Corporation, Teesside, in Sheffield, they've developed a new model of physical regeneration. These things don't happen if you run them all from the center. They couldn't happen if you run them all from the center. The harder question here is not why, but how. We've been running a deal-based model, the box in the top left-hand picture on this slide. And that, I think, has reached the limits of what it can do. It did some useful things, but it's not enough. We need a more comprehensive approach. If we could click again, we'll see that. A comprehensive devolution model that has some sense of destination. And my personal view is that everywhere needs to move on. So even places that have significant devolution need to carry on the journey of devolution. There's no reason why places like Greater Manchester can't move closer, for example, to the devolved nations. So a stepping stones model is crucial. Mayors are right for some parts of the country, combined authorities, but not everywhere. And we're trying to fit one model again to every part of the country. And we mustn't confuse devolution with decentralization. It's great that civil servants are moving out of Whitehall, but it's not the same as moving powers and funding out of Whitehall. You have to do the second if you really want to change the dial. And then finally, on my slides, I think, I talk here about the importance of devolution, but that alone won't be enough unless you have very clear national alignment on things like infrastructure, on the development of spatial plans for each of the nations. We have them in Scotland, Wales, and Northern Ireland. We don't have one in the UK. And aligning the just transition to zero carbon in a way that is spatially just is crucial, in my view. I'll stop there. Thank you very much.